Sometimes the strangest stories don't come from haunted houses or secret labs, they come from inside our own heads. Our brains can cure pain that shouldn't exist, remember things that never happened, and spread fear or laughter like a virus. Tonight, we'll wander through the borderlands between perception and reality, where psychology feels like magic and memory lies with a straight face. Tonight, every story ties back to the question, what happens when the mind makes it real? Here's how TruLies works. You'll hear 7 stories, each told as if every detail is absolutely true. But only 4 of them are taken from documented psychological cases and real-world events. The other 3 are carefully crafted fictions. Your job is to decide which is which. Keep score in your head or write it down. At least one of your instincts will betray you. When you're sure, drop your guesses and your final score in the comments. And whatever you do, don't peek ahead to the verdicts at the end. Tonight's episode unfolds in 7 chapters of doubt and conviction. You'll visit operating rooms where belief can heal, dormitories seized by unstoppable laughter, and towns that remember things that never were. Some stories will sound too bizarre to be anything but invented. Others will seem mundane, until one detail bends reality. As you listen, lock in your first impressions, because your brain is already taking sides. Let's open the file on Story 1 and see how far a shared illusion can go when an entire class swears a movie once existed. In a dim university lecture hall, film professor Dr. Alan Mercer paces before a glowing screen, telling his students about a forgotten VHS horror movie from the 1980s he swears he rented, a low-budget film called The Red Staircase. He describes the cover by heart, a concrete stairwell spiraling down into darkness, washed in red emergency light, with cheap yellow letters warning, some doors should stay closed, and that shaky VHS tracking you had to fix by smacking the VCR. Alan retells the plot. College kids trapped in an abandoned apartment block, climbing and descending the same central stairwell as the lights grow blood red, vanishing floor by floor, until only one survivor remains, unable to escape the looping building. He can still feel the final scene. Gravity twisting, doors sliding onto the ceiling, the red light pulsing like a heartbeat, then a hard cut to black, and a low, distorted whisper curling out of the speakers. You were always here. Years later, a former student emails asking about that horror movie with the red stairwell, describing the same VHS cover from an empty box at her parents' house. Soon, more ex-students message him, insisting they rented the red staircase long before his class. Their memories pile up, bloody footprints going both up and down the stairs, a landlord who only speaks through the crackling intercom, a looping chant under the soundtrack, and always that same last line, echoing from childhood living rooms. You were always here. A small documentary crew begins investigating, filming Alan in his parents' attic, digging through dusty VHS stacks and old rental receipts, then interviewing people worldwide who vividly recall the red-lit stairwell but cannot name a single actor, director, studio, or TV channel. Archivists and psychologists show shelves of catalogs and databases. No listing, no copyright, no stills. While experts explain false memories, suggestion, and the Mandela effect, even as interviewees produce old journals and doodles of red staircases made years before meeting Alan. Online, lost media fans argue theories. Regional student film, mislabeled TV episode, one-off bootleg, yet every new testimony tightens the same details and erases the evidence further, until someone quietly admits on camera, I don't know if I watched it or just remember remembering it. In the closing shot, Alan stands alone on a real stairwell under a dull red emergency light, confessing he can still feel the VHS in his hands and the VCR's click. Before the sound drops, darkness creeps in and a nearly inaudible whisper breathes, you were always here. Reset your expectations. Story 2 asks what happens when a single damaged brain rewrites our map of the mind. Paris, 1861. In a crowded charity hospital, nurses whisper about a quiet middle-aged man who understands every word they say. Yet when he tries to answer, only one strange sound ever comes out. Tan, tan, tan. Years earlier, he'd been a skilled craftsman who spoke normally, but as his illness slowly attacked his brain, his speech shrank until his whole voice, his whole public identity, was reduced to that single broken syllable and frustrated gestures. He isn't mad or confused. Ask his age and he nods correctly. Point to the door and he looks. Insult him and his eyes blaze with anger. But when he strains to reply, his mouth shapes meaning and delivers only, again, tan. Most scientists of the time believe the brain works as one undivided mass, that abilities like language are spread everywhere, and they mock the idea that a specific mental function could live in a specific patch of tissue. Enter surgeon and anatomist Paul Broca, who carefully examines the patient known only as Tan, notices his mostly preserved understanding, his almost absent speech, and the weakness on the right side of his body, and quietly suspects a hidden injury in the left brain. When Tan, whose real name is Louis Victor Leborgne, dies in his early 50s after more than 20 years in the hospital, Broca obtains his brain, slices into the left frontal lobe, and finds a large, destroyed region exactly where he predicted. Over the next few years, Broca studies more patients who can understand language but speak only in short, halting phrases or a few words, and every autopsy reveals damage in roughly that same spot in the left frontal lobe. Presenting his results to Paris scientists, Broca argues that this area, later called Broca's area, doesn't control intelligence or personality, but is crucial for turning thoughts into fluent spoken words, proving that specific mental functions are localized in particular brain regions. Leborgne's preserved brain is still examined with modern MRI and CT scans, which reveal damage spreading beyond classic Broca's area, refining the story but confirming the core message. Language relies on particular, vulnerable networks in the brain. Today, when a stroke damages the left frontal lobe and leaves someone able to understand but struggling to speak, neurologists are in a sense meeting Tan again, the man who could only say one syllable, yet help the world hear how the brain is organized. For story 3, we move from words to pain itself, and a simple mirror that dares to argue with the nervous system. When he woke after the car crash, he was certain of one thing. His missing left hand, the hand that was no longer there, felt like it was being crushed in a fist so tight the bones might shatter. Nurses tried everything, adjusting IVs, smoothing sheets, checking bandages, until he finally understood the horror. Pain was exploding from fingers that had been amputated days earlier, as if a ghost hand were trapped in an invisible vice. This torment had a name, phantom limb pain, when the brain refuses to accept that a limb is gone, still insisting it exists, frozen and twisted, while painkillers fail because there is no flesh left to numb or muscles to relax. Neurologist Dr. V.S. Ramachandran believed the problem lived in the brain's body map, not the stump. So he carried in something that looked like a joke instead of high-tech medicine, a plain wooden box with a mirror down the middle. The man slid his intact right hand into one side of the box and his left arm stump into the other, then leaned over. In the mirror, his right hand's reflection lined up perfectly where his missing left hand should have been. "Open and close your hand," the doctor said, and as the man slowly flexed his real fingers, he watched the mirror version, the fake left hand, open and close too, moving smoothly in a body that no longer existed. At first, nothing changed, and then he gasped. For the first time since the amputation, he felt his phantom fist begin to obey, each imagined finger slowly uncurling as the reflected hand opened wide in the glass. Within minutes, the crushing, months-long agony that heavy drugs could not touch melted away, simply because his eyes convinced his brain that the clenched, non-existent hand was finally stretching, relaxing, and letting go. Over many short sessions at the mirror box, he repeated the ritual, both hands opening and closing together, until his brain slowly rewired its map, and the ghost hand's vicious cramps came back less often, weaker, sometimes disappearing entirely. What looked like a $3 magic trick became a quiet revolution in medicine, showing that a simple illusion could rewrite the brain's reality and steal the pain from a limb that lived only as a memory. Story 4 takes us into a school where laughter spread like wildfire and no one could find the match that lit it. In early 1962, at a small girls' boarding school in Kashasha, Tanzania, 3 students burst into sudden, unstoppable laughter during class, and their giggles refused to die down, rolling through the room like a strange, invisible wave. Teachers ordered silence, scolded, even prayed, but the laughter kept erupting. Soon dozens of girls were doubled over, clutching their stomachs, some laughing until tears streamed down their faces. Then the laughter twisted into something darker. Some girls began sobbing, others complained of burning skin, tight chests, strange rashes, or dizziness, with a few collapsing to the floor as their classmates watched in terror. Rumors raced through the dorms, whispers of curses, poisoned food, angry spirits, or punishment from God, while the strict missionary staff insisted on discipline, even as classes dissolved into chaos. Outside the school, Tanzania had just gained independence, and these young girls lived far from home, caught between traditional village life and a demanding Western-style education, carrying fears they rarely dared to voice. When more than half the students were struck by waves of laughter, crying, and fainting that could last for hours, authorities finally shut the school and sent the girls back to their villages, hoping distance would break the spell. Instead, the symptoms spread. In nearby Nshamba and other communities, girls who had returned from Kashasha, and then their friends and relatives, began laughing uncontrollably in markets, homes, and churches, sometimes collapsing in fright. Over months, the laughing disease jumped from village to village and school to school, affecting hundreds, disrupting lessons, closing institutions, and leaving families and officials desperate for any explanation. Doctors tested for infections, toxins, and strange chemicals, but found nothing. Psychiatrists recognized a different pattern: mass psychogenic illness, where real physical symptoms rise from shared stress and spread through fear and suggestion. After about a year, the episodes slowly faded on their own, leaving behind puzzled doctors and shaking communities, and a lasting lesson that emotions and stress can move through a society like a virus, sometimes beginning with a single laugh. Now, Story 5 checks us into a hospital room where a quiet mechanical flaw feels exactly like a supernatural curse. For 3 long years, the night shift at a Midwestern hospital whispered the same warning down a dim corridor: whatever you do, don't get assigned to room 19. Patients went into room 19 looking stable and hopeful, but too many suddenly crashed at night. Code blues, blaring alarms, frantic CPR, and the whiteboard by the nurses' station felt like it needed a skull next to that number. Terrified nurses quietly traded assignments, some swearing the air in room 19 felt colder and heavier, like the room itself was waiting for something bad to happen. Then patients began telling the same eerie story, waking at night to see a tall, dark figure standing silently at the foot of the bed, watching just hours before their breathing collapsed. The chaplain came to bless the room. A nurse taped a tiny religious medal under the tray table, and staff rushed in and out, hearts pounding, convinced room 19 was cursed or haunted. A new quality control director arrived, ignored the ghost stories, and pulled months of data, shocked to find that even after adjusting for how sick patients were, room 19 truly had far more crises than any other room. Investigating every inch, the team finally found it: a slightly miscalibrated pulse oximeter in room 19 that made blood oxygen levels look safer than they really were, quietly hiding patients' slow slide into danger. Mild hypoxia from that hidden drop in oxygen, worsened by slightly weaker ventilation, can cause anxiety, a sense of doom, and vivid hallucinations, turning low oxygen into shadowy visitors at the foot of terrified patients' beds. They replaced the faulty sensor, fixed the airflow, tightened equipment checks, and suddenly room 19 went quiet. No more clusters of codes, no more dark figures, just an ordinary hospital room again. Still, in the break room, older nurses tell new hires about the bad years in room 19, proof that the scariest hospital ghosts aren't spirits at all, but the invisible mistakes hidden inside the machines we trust. Story 6 scrubs in for surgery, or something that only looks like it, and watches belief do the cutting. In a brightly lit Houston operating room in the late 1990s, a man in his 50s lies on the table, trusting that today's knee surgery will finally end years of grinding, relentless osteoarthritis pain. His surgeon, Dr. Bruce Mosley, a respected VA and Baylor orthopedic specialist famous for arthroscopic knee cleanups, quietly prepares to do something almost no surgeon has dared to do before. For this patient, and many others in a new study, Mosley may perform one of 3 options: a full joint washout, a careful scraping and smoothing of damaged tissue, or a surgery that only looks real from the outside. In the sham procedure, patients are fully anesthetized, their knees are scrubbed and draped, small incisions are made, tools are clinked, and operating room chatter is staged, yet nothing is actually done inside the joint. Neither the patients, nor the nurses, therapists, or follow-up evaluators know who got real surgery and who got pretend surgery. making this a rare, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial in the world of operations. Over months and years, researchers track pain levels, walking ability, climbing stairs, and daily function, expecting that real surgery will clearly outperform the fake version if it truly repairs something mechanical. When the data are finally analyzed, all three groups, lavage, debridement, and sham, show similar improvements, with the pretend surgery working just as well as the real procedures on pain and function scores. Some men in the sham group, convinced their knees were fixed, proudly report walking without agony and even playing sports with grandchildren, their belief seemingly rewiring how their brains interpret real joint damage. Published in 2002, the trial shocks surgeons worldwide, forcing medicine to admit that the drama, ritual, and expectation of surgery can be as powerful as the scalpel, especially for knee osteoarthritis. The study doesn't prove pain is imaginary. It shows that the mind and body constantly talk to each other, raising a haunting question. How many treatments work partly because of what we do and partly because of what we believe? Finally, Story 7 returns us to an ordinary town square where a single picture frame may have rewritten local history. At dawn in a foggy coastal town, the camera glides past quiet houses and gulls crying over the harbor, slipping into a corner grocery where a cluttered bulletin board is dominated by a sun-faded drawing of a brown-haired girl in a yellow raincoat marked missing. Locals pass the poster without looking, yet in their minds, they still see the frantic cliffside searches, hear her name shouted into the wind, and picture her mother sobbing on the pier, candles trembling in paper cups around her. A newly transferred detective, grabbing groceries his first night in town, pauses when he notices how old the poster is, squints at the washed-out name and dates, and feels a small knot of unease tighten in his stomach. Back at the station, he types her name into the police database and then the wider county system, watching line after line come up empty. No missing girl, no yellow raincoat, no pier vigil, while every officer he asks speaks of the case as unquestioned history. He digs through dusty archives, scrolling microfiche and unfolding yellowed newspapers, and discovers only one child case from that year. A 9-year-old boy in another county, briefly missing and safely found, with nothing tying tragedy to this town at all. Interviewing residents separately, a grocer, a retired teacher, an old fisherman, he hears the same confident story repeated. A 7-year-old girl with shoulder-length brown hair, a bright yellow raincoat, weeks of searching, a candlelight vigil on the pier, even one specific TV news van by the parking lot. Disturbed by how perfectly their memories match without evidence, he follows a thin lead to an aging former gallery owner who nervously retrieves a dusty portfolio revealing sketches for an old art exhibit, including the original fictional missing child poster. The same face, the same yellow coat, the invented words, last seen near the pier. In flashbacks, we see the exhibit decades earlier, tourists and locals stopping at the window, some rushing in with tears, moved by the poster before reading the small plaque explaining it was only social commentary about how images can make us feel real sorrow for stories that never happened. At a crowded town hall, the detective presents police records, the gallery's paperwork, and the artist's drafts, explaining how repeated images and shared stories can plant false memories, while some residents grow angry or ashamed, and others secretly feel relieved that no real girl was lost. As dusk falls on the pier and families wander past, the camera lingers on the worn poster still pinned in one shop, while the detective's voice asks how different a false memory truly is from reality when it has shaped a town's fears, love, and identity for decades. 7 stories. 4 that come from the strange but documented world of real psychology, and 3 spun from the same materials but woven into fiction. By now, you've made your choices and maybe argued with yourself along the way. Let's see where your mind led you and where it led you astray. Story 1. The movie that never existed was fictional. We built this one from the idea of shared false memories in cult cinema, stitching together a classic Mandela effect for a VHS that never rolled. Story 2. The man who could only say tan was real. This tragic patient is preserved in medical history, his brain lesion and case notes anchoring one of neurology's most famous demonstrations of localized speech centers. Story 3. The phantom pain that a mirror could erase was real. Clinical reports and controlled trials describe mirror therapy easing phantom limb pain, where a simple reflection convinces the brain to release a limb that isn't there. Story 4. The boarding school that couldn't stop laughing was real. Historical accounts and psychological analyses document the Tanzanian laughter epidemic as a textbook case of mass psychogenic illness sweeping through schools and villages. Story 5. Room 19's ghostly oxygen alarm was fictional. We engineered this tale by combining hospital folklore with the very real effects of mild hypoxia, turning a calibration error into a modern haunting. Story 6. The sham surgery that worked like the real thing was real. Published clinical trials on arthroscopic knee procedures show placebo operations performing as well as the real thing, forcing surgeons to confront the power of expectation. Story 7. The town that remembered the wrong missing child was fictional. This town never existed in any police record. We crafted it from studies on suggestibility and art installations that people slowly misremembered as lived events. If your score surprised you, remember, every time your gut was wrong tonight, it proved our theme. When the mind wants something to be real, it rarely asks permission from the facts.